About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. The Chickasaw National Recreation Area was my playground. I loved that area so much. I rode more miles on my bike there than anywhere else, and I walked nearly every trail and road. Every day I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, however, I had rode a bit further than usual. On my way back, I decided to ride the trail known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roam, and there was a large spring/fountain there for all to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a stone bridge across the creek and then up the road to my home. It was dark at this time, and all I had to use to see was the full moon. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when I felt a sharp pain in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. Then I heard a noise sounding like something hitting the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock about the size of a baseball rolling across the trail. Me, confused, starts to look up the side of the hill. Just as I turn my head to look, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down and hitting my front wheel. I finally have my eyes adjust to look and see someone very tall and very dark, covered in hair at the top of the hill, throwing things at me and screaming. I yelled that I had a cell phone and I was going to call the police. I didn't actually have one, as I didn't have a cell phone yet. This seemed to make it angry. He started charging down the hill at me. For obvious reasons, I got on my bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a huge splashing noise in the creek, and I saw it was a large rock that had been thrown. I was in the clear to home, but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station later the next morning and told a ranger I knew about what happened. He basically just joked about how I was attacked by a Bigfoot or something. I told him that I didn't know what it was, but it was definitely trying to hurt me, and he said he'd let me know if anything happened. I just said fine and left. The very next week I was riding in the daylight when the ranger pulled up next to me and said for me to get in. I asked why, and he said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police station in town, but before we got out of the car, he turns and says, "I have a huge apology to give you. I will be honest that I didn't believe you when you told me about your story of being attacked. However, it has come to my attention that a couple was out in the same area and got attacked in the same way, saying that they saw a large hairy creature throwing rocks and sticks and screaming at them. They called the police and they came out, some of the other rangers, including myself. I immediately thought about what you had told me. When we arrived and started up the hill, sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us. Guns drawn and yelling, 2 officers tackled a man to the ground. He was a 6'5", tall, naked, covered in mud, long-haired, large-bearded man. He had escaped from the Veterans Center across Veterans Lake. Apparently he thought he was back in Vietnam and was trying to take out the enemy. The ranger said I was very lucky because he was actually trying to kill me. We went inside so I could give the police my statement as to what happened. They had him sent to a more secure facility somewhere else. To this day, I still get the shivers when I hike that trail, and I always keep my eyes on top of that ridge. One of my major hobbies is hunting and fishing, and I do love to do it, but there have been several times where I have gone hunting and seen some strange things. The one I remember most, and that still freaks me out to this day, is when I saw something that made me freeze in place. I just turned 16 and lived in Crown Point, Indiana, by a whole bunch of woods that were about a mile from my house. I decided to go hunting when I got off work, since it was opening day. It was a slow day when I found out, which wasn't surprising, since any time I went out later in the day, I wouldn't see any deer, but I had a feeling that I might, since it was getting darker. I sat for another 2 hours, and I was about to leave since the sun was setting, and I didn't want to get lost on the way back to my car, since it would probably already be pitch black by the time I got there. So I was about to get down, and my gun was hanging on a rope above my stand, when I noticed something peculiar. I sat back in the stand and stared at this light bouncing up and down through the woods. Then it started going full speed to the right of me. At first, I thought it might be a tracker hunting a deer, since some people put trackers on deer that they feed so that way when they get big, they shoot them. Anyway, it startled me, but then I just figured it was a hunter, so that I continued getting my gun down. When I finished and went to go walk down the stand, I almost completely fell. The light was brighter, so I knew it was closer, and it was running and bouncing to the right of me. It got as close as to 4 yards, and I knew it wasn't any deer because there was no noise whatsoever. I finally just looked in front of me and actually ran at full speed. When I got to my car, I was still in a daze and drove home. I didn't really say anything because people would probably not believe me, and many of you probably won't believe me, but it was the second most scary experience I've had. There was another one I had in Chicago at a hotel called the Congress, where a faucet turned on with nobody there, and it really got me to believe in ghosts. I would tell you I barely believed in spirits and thought it was just an explanation to most things, but I can't find an explanation to this one. This was not a light bug either, because it was the size of my fist. I just really wanted to tell people about it and ask if anyone else has experienced anything like this. I was alone at my favorite fishing spot that resides less than a half-mile away from a general public picnic area. I arrived early in the afternoon, readied my fishing pole, and began to fish. The early afternoon had a cool, gentle breeze. The frogs sang to one another, the crickets created a nice little symphony, and the clicking of my fish reel was carried away by the rushing water of Otter Creek. Hours went by and I managed to catch a few fish here and there. I popped open some cold Stellas and smoked the Camels as the day went by. About 5 or 6 hours into my fishing, the fish were no longer biting. I didn't care, I was just there to get away from the city and take some stress off my shoulders. I needed it since my job had kicked me last week. I was in no rush to leave. I had plenty of beer in my cooler and plenty of cigarettes to smoke. I even ate sunflower seeds and beef jerky. Both go well with beer. The sun started to set, and I was feeling pretty toasty by that time. The wind picked up a little, and the leaves on the trees rustled as the branches swayed back and forth. I had already put down my fishing pole since I wasn't having any luck, and drank a couple more beers. I was just relaxing. It was nice and peaceful until a loud splash occurred about 50 yards down the creek. I jumped at the sound, spilling my beer on myself. I looked in the direction of the splash, but saw nothing. Must have been a fish, I thought. It was hard to see since the sun was setting, so everything looked like silhouettes. I stared a little longer down the creek, waiting to see if anything would move. Nothing, just the trees moving side to side. I shifted my attention back to my beer, chugged the rest of it, and started to gather my things. I stood up, stretched my arms out, and caught something out of the corner of my eye. Quickly looked back down the creek where I heard the splash and saw a dark figure standing, slouching in the middle of the creek. I couldn't make out what it was, and I was squinting hard trying to focus on it. I waited a couple minutes to see if it would move, but it just kept standing in the same spot, doing nothing. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, since I did have one too many beers. I heard another splash, but this time it came from up the creek, the direction I needed to go. I shifted my attention up the creek and witnessed a deer crossing the water. I watched the deer disappear into the woods, and I looked down the creek, and the slouchy figure had vanished. Stupid deer, that's all, I said to myself. I bent down to pick up my things and began to hear rocks clacking in the distance. It got louder and louder, closer and closer. It surrounded me. It was everywhere. Tree branches were being snapped in all directions. The clacking of rocks got louder and then completely stopped. All I could hear was the sound of rushing water, frogs, and the leaves of the trees, and the crickets. My eyes shifted from side to side, trying to catch a glimpse of the person, but it was too dark to see anything. I pulled out my flashlight from the side pocket of my cooler and shined it all around me. If I thought I saw something or someone, I would hold the light until my mind would learn that it was just a bush or tree trunk. I was determined to catch whatever was making all the noise. I should have left instead of staying around. I placed the flashlight under my arm, pulled out a cigarette, placed it in my mouth, and flipped my lighter. I lit the cigarette and using my hand to block the wind from putting out the flame. Then I saw something through the orange glow of the flame. It was standing directly across the creek from where I was standing. I shined my flashlight frantically, revealing a slouchy woman. She was completely nude, but her skin was grayish and scaly. Her head was bent all the way completely back, showing just the underside of her chin. Her arms hung to her sides, and her hands were long and bony. Her fingernails were razor sharp, and her whole body was covered in patches of dark hair. What in the hell? What do you want? I asked, politely. No response. I was too afraid to move. I didn't move the light anywhere else. I didn't know if there were more of these things. For all I knew, I could have been surrounded by them, just waiting to eat me alive. But I had to get out of there fast. Look, I don't know what's going on, but I'm getting my stuff and leaving, okay? I said to her, thinking that would make her go away. I slowly bent down to pick up my fishing pole and cooler, keeping the light on the scaly woman. I stood up and she made a twitching move. I could hear her bones crack. Her skin made the sound of brand new leather when bending the arm of a jacket. Then she slowly started to make her way towards me, but she was walking in the water. My eyes widened and my heart started to pound violently. I began to tremble in fear, and the light of my flashlight danced around. She slowly bent down on all fours and started walking on top of the water. Her head still bent backwards and her back arched inward. What I saw next really screwed me up. She started to bear crawl on the water towards me, and her body contorted in weird ways, like she didn't have any bones in her body at all. I was completely paralyzed with fear. The scaly woman stopped dead middle of the creek, and her head slowly started to rise forward, and I could hear every neck bone crack. Her mouth was wide open, just a black hole. Her eyes were all white, and her scalp peered through her wet, stringy black hair. She let out an ear-piercing cry and jolted for me. I dropped my stuff and ran as fast as I could. The sandy bank made it a challenge, but I dug in hard and ran. I could hear splashing behind me as she came after me. I could hear bones crack and pop, and her skin stretching. She let out another ear-piercing scream, and so did I. My lungs burned as I fought to gasp for air. The stupid cigarettes weren't helping me. My legs were giving out from underneath me. I fought to keep running. My stomach was in knots, and I wanted to vomit so badly. The beer sloshed around in my stomach. Finally, I came to the path that led to the woods. The splashing had stopped. I hid behind a big oak tree and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The night fell silent. I couldn't hear the frogs or the crickets anymore. Maybe it was because of the throbbing of my veins, deafened by nature. I took deep breaths, trying to calm my heart. Sweat dripped from every crevice of my body. My chest hurt and burned. My sides ached with every inhale and exhale due to the fact that I was out of shape. I then started to hear scratching on the other side of the tree. She was clawing the bark. My heart pounded once again. The branches of the oak tree shook right above me. She was climbing the tree. I slowly shined my flashlight upwards, and she was hanging upside down like a bat, staring down at me with her big white eyes and her mouth gaping open. She began to climb down the tree like a spider. My survival instincts kicked in, and I took off, bolting in the opposite direction at once. I ran through the dark woods, avoiding rocks, low-hanging branches, and outgrown roots the best I could. The last thing I wanted was to trip while being chased by whatever this thing was. I managed to reach the end of the woods. Now it was time to cross an open field to get to my car. I could hear every single branch snap behind me as she made her way out of the dark woods. She was gaining on me fast. With every last weak muscle in my legs, I ran, giving it everything I had. I was now out in the open with nowhere to hide. The moon shone brightly on the open field, making me an easy target. I glanced back to see her galloping after me, her back arched upward and her head stretched forward. The bones of her spine poked out from underneath her skin. I began to slow down. I had reached my stamina limit. I thought I was totally screwed. My running turned into a jog, and I couldn't catch my breath. I just wanted to give up. I wanted this to be over with immediately. I saw my car parked all by its lonesome in the gravel parking lot. With a very heavy exhale, just a few more steps, I told myself. I fumbled for my keys in my shirt pocket and hit the unlock button. The overhead light lit the inside of my dark car, telling me it was unlocked. I reached the driver's side door and quickly opened it, jumped in and jammed the key into the ignition, turning the key and slammed the gear shift into drive. I stomped on the gas and the front tires kicked up gravel, but they spun for a few seconds before getting traction. She was arm's length when I managed to drive away. At last, I was on my way out of those woods. I made my way to the asphalt road when she appeared once again. The headlights illuminated her, casting a long shadow behind her. I hit the gas harder so I could try to run her over. She shifted up her body. She put her bony hand up in the air and stepped to her right and swiped at my car as I flew by. She managed to penetrate the driver's side door with her claws, and I could hear her tear the aluminum all the way down the rear end of my car. As I passed her at high speed, I looked into the rearview mirror and saw her standing in her slouchy position, just watching me through her stringy black hair. The red glow of the brake lights gave her a very demonized look. She got down on all fours and bear crawled her way into the darkness where she belonged. I sped all the way home, ignoring all the speed limit signs and red lights. I didn't care, I just wanted to get home as fast as possible. When I arrived, I parked my car in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a few minutes to gather my thoughts. I exited my car to survey the damage, but there was nothing there. Not one scratch. I couldn't believe it. Did I imagine it all? No, I knew it had to have happened. My mind and brain were completely drained due to the fear I'd endured. I lit myself a cigarette and stood in the driveway examining my car with shifty eyes, trying to make sense of everything. I finished my cigarette and went inside, made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and I never went back to my favorite fishing spot. Last summer, me and my friends would always go to this baseball field behind the school where we had ramps set up so we could ride skateboards. One day, we noticed some guy was standing in the woods watching us. We stopped what we were doing and went home. A week or so later, we went back and saw him again. One of my friends called out to him, but he just turned around and walked into the woods. We were starting to get creeped out at this point and went home. Me and my friend, the one who called out to the man, were riding our bikes on a trail near the woods when we decided to walk through the woods, and we found a tent that had needles scattered everywhere, and a sleeping bag as well as food and empty beer bottles everywhere. We heard rapid footsteps crushing the leaves farther into the woods as we saw the top of a man's head running at us. We sprinted out of the woods and back to our bikes and sped off, and went back to my friend's house. Around a month later, me and my friend went back into the woods. My friend and I went our own ways, but when I heard my friend scream, I ran to the sound of his voice, and he said he saw a man crouched in between trees watching him. We didn't go back to those woods for a year, and we didn't have anything horrifying happen. Until this year. I posted this because 3 weeks ago, we went back to that baseball field and saw the man again. We went back to my friend's house. At my friend's house, we saw the man again standing in his front lawn with a knife. We threatened to shoot him if he didn't leave, and surprisingly he left. My friend's parents didn't own a gun, but I'm glad that the man was dumb enough to believe us, and we called my friend's parents, and they called the police in case the man returned. The police weren't able to help, but we told them the whole story of what happened. I went home since I lived next door to my friend, so my parents saw the police and wanted me home. It's been 3 weeks, and we don't plan on ever going back to that area of the woods. Last year, I went on a hike in a medium-small patch of forest in outskirts of Stockholm, Sweden. That place always gets me relaxed, and I get to look at cool bugs, mushrooms, and plants. Occasionally, I'd see some birds and animals, too. The forest is on a hill and a little area surrounding it. The patch is a field on one side, a small cemetery on the back, a big road on the front, and then a thin tree line that connects it to another patch of forest on the other side. So it was autumn, and it was still somewhat warm but windy. I had been at the hill on the side, but the terrain got too bad, with fallen trees and thick bushes. So I walked down the hill and continued my way to get to the other side. While walking, I was far enough from the road that I couldn't hear any cars, and the fields were all empty, but I heard something that sounded like laughter. Like a weird, gagged kind of laughter. I stopped and looked around to see where it came from, but there was nothing. So I started walking again, and I heard it once more, so I looked around again, and I heard faint shuffling through the reeds coming from the top of the hill. I stopped and started looking for the cause, and then stopped. The noise also stopped. I pulled out my hunting knife just in case it was a rabid animal or something. After a few seconds, I just continued walking, and the same thing happened, and it seemed to me that the thing was following me. I stopped again and looked up and caught a glimpse of something. It was hard to tell how big the thing was since I was downhill, but if I had to guess, it would be the size of a big dog. I only saw it for a second, but it was hunched over and had black fur. I caught another glimpse, but only for a second or two again, and saw it wobble weirdly while walking, like if it was an overweight dog or something. I figured out that it was probably some dog-like animal minding its own business or looking for food, so I kept walking. After a while, it stopped. After walking for a few more minutes, I came across a suitable place to climb up the hill, so I started going up. I found a small wooden shelter on the way, like tree branches cut and made into a meter-high roof thing, all done neatly. I thought some kids might have done it, so I just ignored it and went up. As soon as I got to the top of the hill, I noticed this huge patch of dead and rotting trees, grass, and plants. Everything was black, but not like a fire, but when things rot. And it was in the middle of healthy, alive plants and trees. It felt like it was roughly in a circle. I walked around and noticed there were no bugs there, not even mushrooms, which were thriving in the place and all around. Everything was dead in that area. Everything was eerily silent, too. I felt kind of strange and started feeling like I was being watched. I looked around and didn't see anything. So I just continued walking further into the forest and everything became alright. Rest of the hike was uneventful. I didn't feel disturbed about any of it, but then I just shared this story with a friend who got creeped out and told me not to hike alone when going a few kilometers deep into a forest. I still think it's absolutely fine to do so, and I'm personally not thinking much about it, but I thought it'd be entertaining for you guys to read. I don't know what happened out there, but I don't know if it was supernatural or just some animal, and maybe a coincidence that the forest was burned or something, but I really don't know. So when I was 15, I decided to take a hike in the woods behind my house. Me and my dad had made a 4-wheel trail many years ago that went through a creek, and it had been almost 7 years since, and I hadn't seen what it looked like. My parents bought a restaurant, and that really took up all our time. Unfortunately, my 4-wheeler was broken down, so I had to do a journey on foot. I put my long waterproof boots on and brought my phone to take a few pictures because my dad really wanted to see what it had looked like down there. So it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I started my hike. It was also mushroom season, and my mom loved mushrooms, so I thought I would look for some while on the hike. As I was getting deeper into the woods, I noticed that there were sounds coming from behind me. Every time I stopped, so would the sounds. I turned around a few times in paranoia, but saw nothing but trees. I was actually having trouble finding where exactly the creek was because everything was so overgrown. I began to walk again, and then the noises started up again. I knew right off the bat that they were following me. I stopped again, and so did the footsteps. I thought to myself, was it my dad playing a trick on me? Then I remembered he wasn't even home. I decided to play stupid and say, "Nice try, Dad, but you didn't scare me." I really don't know why I did that, but I guess I was hoping they would go away. My heart was racing, and finding mushrooms or the creek was not even on my mind anymore. My mind was trying to think of a way to get the hell out of these woods. I took a few steps forward and stopped and turned around. I saw someone jump behind a tree. From the brief glance I got at the person, it wasn't anybody I knew. I started walking faster this time, and the person stepped out from behind the tree and just stared at me. It was some nasty-looking man, probably 6'5" and 270 pounds. He said, "Hey, I'm lost. Can you point me to the nearest road?" I told him I didn't know where the nearest road was, and he got a look of anger in his eyes and took a few steps forward. This situation was sketchy as hell because running into someone this deep into the woods was very rare, and this guy did not look like someone you would want to have run into with. He said, "Hey, I want to show you something behind this tree." I didn't know what to say. I finally just said no and that I had to get going. Of course it was a lie. He just stared at me, and I was afraid of what he might be getting ready to do. I looked at him one last time and full on ran in the other direction. I heard his footsteps behind me, but I was pretty decent running, so I outran him pretty easily. I hid behind a log. A few minutes went by and I heard footsteps coming towards me, and then I saw him. I ducked behind the log even lower. I heard his footsteps pass, and then he was out of sight. I got up and ran like hell out of those woods. I didn't hear any more footsteps as I was running out of the woods. I made it home safely, and I locked all the doors and shut the windows. I didn't tell anybody in my family about it, and only a few friends. The thing that still confuses me about why that was that man so deep into those woods, and why did he have to follow me? This creeps me out even a year and a half later. I have went into those same woods a few times after that, and nothing strange has ever happened again. When you think of creatures in the woods here in North Carolina, you usually think of bears and wildcats, right? Well, that's what I thought too. Living here my entire life, I can now say that I was close-minded about it. This was about 17 years ago when I was an impressionable young girl of 15, and it was Halloween night. My friend Steph decided to make a go at ghost hunting, with her and her two other guy friends, Frank and Jeremy, and this is how it happened. I was just hanging around the house at around dusk when I hear my mom talking to someone at the door, and she let them in. I don't move from my spot on the couch, I just waited to see who it was. It was Steph. I could hear her talking and mention going ghost hunting. I was really uneasy about the whole idea, and I said I didn't want to go, and Steph asked why. I told her that when you go hunting for trouble, you will definitely find it. She just laughed in my face and made me go anyway. Our first stop was an old church we used to go to, and it was really freaky at night, but that's a different story. I'm talking about our next stop, Panther Top. When I found out we were going there, I was upset because of all the stories about what happens when you go to the top. My friends didn't believe me until we were on the old dirt road that leads to the top of the mountain, where there was a seed orchard. I was looking out of the window at the passing forest and saw a huge bonfire in the woods, in a small clearing. I looked closer and saw people hand in hand circling it, except they were too small to be adults. That is where that thought ended, because when I looked into the top of the trees, I saw dead children. It wasn't physical children. It looked like the ghosts of children that were attacked by panthers here. There were many stories and accounts of seeing big black cats here in my area ever since I was a little girl. Anyway, when I saw the ghosts, I screamed and cried until Steph tried to get me to calm down. She said she didn't see anything. I rode in silence in a sort of daze until we reached the top. Steph and her friends wanted me to go with them to look around, but when they opened the doors, a heavy feeling in the air made me want to not even step out of the truck. The three of them told me to stay in the vehicle till they got back. I sighed and looked to where they disappeared in the woods. Then something weird came over me. I started to draw in the dirt. I don't even know what it was I was doing when I heard Steph scream. My head shot up and I saw her and the two guys booking it to the truck, screaming in fear about two red eyes staring at them. In her haste, Steph grabbed my hand and yanked me to the truck, As I glanced back, I saw them. Two red glowing eyes about a foot apart. I screamed too at this point as I was pulling myself up into the truck. Something grabbed my long skirt and yanked me backward. Steph screamed, and with all her might, she dragged me in and slammed the door. As soon as that happened, we kicked up gravel, and in our haste we left. We sped down the gravel road at top speed, but it felt like something was purposefully making us slow down. I was panicking as I looked out the window. Steph saw my face as all the color left it and froze. As we looked out the window, we heard hooves. Yeah, hooves, right behind us, and we were going 70. I looked forward to the driver, Jeremy, and he was scared. We finally made it to the bottom, so we went to rest for a minute at the church and collect our thoughts. For some reason, I got unusually sleepy and fell asleep. It probably wasn't even 5 minutes before we felt the truck rock violently back and forth, waking us up, and on the condensation on the windows were weird markings I've never seen before. I looked over onto the top of the mountain where we were. I would swear on a stack of Bibles at what I saw. There was a big, bright green glow at the top. Needless to say, I have never been back there and never will be. There are some unexplainable things on that mountain, and I will never, ever go back there. I didn't know until I got home and my mom saw my skirt that I had a long tear in it where I was grabbed.